The auctioneer lowered his gavel before it ever touched the podium. "I'm sorry," he said, looking past the crowd. "I can't continue until one person comes forward." My cousin Tyler laughed from the front row. "There's nobody else." The auctioneer didn't move. I was given very specific instructions. Tyler held up the property folder. "The deed is already in my name. So I've been told. Then start the auction." The auctioneer slowly shook his head. "I can't." The old community hall went completely silent. People shifted in their folding chairs. Neighbors whispered. My aunt had been buried less than 2 hours earlier, and now the family farm she'd worked for 40 years was about to be sold. Or at least that's what everyone believed. Tyler looked irritated. "What are we waiting for?" The auctioneer glanced toward the back of the room. "We're waiting for Emily Harper." I froze. I was standing beside the coffee table near the entrance, still wearing the same black dress I'd worn to the funeral. I'm Emily." Every face turned toward me. Tyler's smile disappeared. The auctioneer reached into a leather briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. "I was instructed not to open bidding until this was placed in your hands." Tyler took one step forward. "That's not necessary." The auctioneer calmly pulled the envelope back. "I'm afraid it is." That was the first moment I realized my Aunt Ruth had planned something none of us expected. And it wasn't about the auction. "My name is Emily Harper. I'm 36 years old and I live outside Springfield, Missouri. I work as a large animal veterinarian, which means my days usually begin before sunrise and end long after dark. It's hard work. Messy work. But I love it. Animals don't care what kind of day you've had. They just need you to show up." Maybe that's why my aunt and I understood each other so well. She owned Willow Creek Farm, a 200-acre cattle farm that had been in our family for nearly 80 years. She never married, never had children. She used to joke that the cows argued less than most people. Growing up, I spent every summer there. While other kids went to amusement parks, I learned how to bottle feed calves, repair fences, and drive an old tractor that stalled every third turn. Those were some of the happiest memories of my childhood. When I left for veterinary school, Aunt Ruth hugged me and said something I'd never forgotten. "Learn everything you can. Then come home whenever you need reminding of who you are." Life had other plans. Work kept me busy. Visits became less frequent. Phone calls replaced weekends together. Still, we talked every Sunday evening. Until 6 weeks ago. That's when she told me she was sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. She didn't cry. She simply said, "I'm tired, Emmy." I drove to the farm the next morning. Over the next month I spent every weekend with her. Tyler rarely visited. He was my age, worked in commercial real estate in Kansas City, and always described the farm the same way. "It's valuable land." Never once did he call it home. A week before Aunt Ruth died, I asked if she wanted to talk about the future. She smiled. "The future already knows where it's going." I assumed she meant her will. I didn't ask another question. I wish I had. After the funeral, everyone gathered at the community hall because Tyler had announced there would be an immediate estate auction. "The farm can't sit empty," he told relatives. "We need to move quickly." Something about that bothered me. It felt rushed. But grief has a way of making people doubt their instincts. So I stayed quiet until the auctioneer called my name. He handed me the envelope. Across the front, in Aunt Ruth's familiar handwriting, were 7 words that made my heart skip. "Open only if Tyler starts the auction." I looked up. Tyler was staring at the envelope with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. I had no idea why opening one letter could stop an entire farm auction. But judging by my cousin's face, he already knew what was inside. My fingers hesitated on the edge of the envelope. The room was so quiet I could hear someone coughing near the back wall. Tyler took another step toward me. "Emily." I looked up. "You don't have to open that now." I frowned. "A minute ago you wanted the auction to start." "I've changed my mind." The auctioneer calmly spoke without taking his eyes off me. "Mrs. Harper specifically instructed me that the letter should be opened before I accepted the first bid." Tyler forced a smile. I'm sure my aunt was emotional near the end. The auctioneer didn't react. She was very clear. I broke the seal. Inside were 3 folded pages and a brass key taped to the last sheet. The first line made my heart race. Emmy, if Tyler is trying to auction the farm before everyone has heard this letter, then something happened exactly the way I feared. I looked at Tyler. His face had gone pale. I kept reading. Please ask Mr. Walter Green, the auctioneer, to read the second page out loud. I handed it to Walter. He adjusted his glasses. I'll read it exactly as written. Tyler immediately interrupted. That's unnecessary. Walter looked at him. No. Then he began reading. Asterisk to everyone gathered today. The farm cannot legally be auctioned until the conditions of my final agricultural trust have been verified. Asterisk. Whispers spread across the room. Trust? I looked at Tyler. You told everyone there wasn't a trust. He didn't answer. Walter continued. Asterisk, if anyone claims they already own Willow Creek Farm, ask them one question. Have they presented Schedule C? Asterisk. Walter lowered the paper. He looked directly at Tyler. Have you? Tyler's mouth opened, then closed again. Walter waited. Finally Tyler muttered. I don't know what that is. Walter slowly folded the page. Then I cannot begin today's auction. The room erupted into quiet conversations. One of the neighboring farmers stood up. What's Schedule C? Walter answered calmly. It's a document referenced in the trust. Tyler shook his head. There is no trust. Before Walter could answer, the doors to the community hall opened. An older woman wearing a navy pantsuit walked inside carrying a leather briefcase. She looked around the room. I'm looking for Emily Harper. I raised my hand. I'm Emily. She walked over and handed me a business card. Grace Holloway, estate attorney. I represented your aunt during the last year of her life. I stared at her. I've never met you. Your aunt asked me to keep it that way. Tyler's shoulders slumped. Grace looked toward Walter. Has the letter been opened? Yes. And the auction? Suspended. She nodded. Good. Tyler finally found his voice. You can't just walk in here. Grace calmly opened her briefcase. I believe I can. She removed a thick binder. Across the front was a gold label. The Ruth Harper Agricultural Preservation Trust. Gasps filled the room. I looked at Tyler. You knew. He shook his head quickly. I knew she talked to lawyers. You told everyone there was only a simple will. I thought there was. Grace looked at him. Did you? Tyler didn't answer. Grace continued. Your aunt executed this trust 8 months ago. She opened the binder. The farm was never intended for immediate sale. One of Ruth's longtime neighbors raised his hand. So who owns it? Grace smiled gently. The trust does. Everyone looked confused, including me. Grace turned another page. The trustee. She looked directly at me. Is Emily Harper. My knees nearly gave out. I am. You become acting trustee upon Ruth's passing. I had no idea. That was intentional. Tyler laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. Grace ignored him. The trust gives Emily one responsibility. What responsibility? I asked. Determine whether Willow Creek Farm can remain a working farm for at least 5 years. And if it can, the property cannot be sold. Tyler immediately objected. That's impossible. Grace looked at him. Why? It loses money. I frowned. Aunt Ruth never told me that. Grace slowly closed the binder. According to the financial records. She paused. The farm has been profitable every year except one. I looked at Tyler again. But you told everyone she was drowning in debt. You said selling was the only option. Grace reached into another folder. I believe this is where today's meeting becomes more complicated. She placed several bank statements on the table. They show regular transfers from the farm's operating account. I looked closer. The transfers were made every month. To the same account. The account holder's name had been partially covered for privacy. Grace uncovered it with one finger. Tyler Harper Consulting LLC. The room fell silent. I looked at Tyler. What are these? He swallowed. Reimbursements. For what? He couldn't answer. Grace did. That's exactly what Ruth wanted investigated. I felt my heart pounding. My aunt suspected money was leaving the farm? Grace nodded slowly. She wasn't certain. So she hired you. She hired a forensic accountant first. Every answer was creating another question. Tyler suddenly grabbed his jacket. I don't have to stay here. Walter stepped between him and the exit. I think you should. Tyler looked around the room. No one moved. Not a single neighbor. Not a single relative. For the first time all afternoon, he realized no one was ready to let him walk away. And judging by the thick file still sitting inside Grace's briefcase, the missing money wasn't the biggest secret my aunt had left behind. Tyler looked around the room one more time. You can't keep me here. Grace remained calm. No. But leaving now won't answer the questions everyone is about to ask. Walter quietly moved away from the doorway. No one's stopping you. Tyler didn't leave. Instead, he slowly sat back down. For the first time in my life, my confident cousin looked completely unsure of himself. Grace opened the second section of her briefcase. I believe Ruth wanted this discussed in front of the people who cared most about Willow Creek Farm. She removed a stack of accounting reports. Each one had colored tabs marking different months. I hired a forensic accountant after Ruth noticed unusual withdrawals. I frowned. How unusual? At first. Grace flipped to the first report. They were only a few $1,000s. She turned another page. Then they became larger. Another page. Larger still. She finally stopped. The total printed at the bottom made my stomach turn. $487,320. Someone in the back of the room whispered, "Oh my God." I looked at Tyler. Almost $500,000? He immediately answered. It wasn't stolen. Grace didn't react. I didn't say it was. They were business expenses. For what business? My consulting company. What consulting? I helped Ruth modernize the farm. I couldn't help asking, when? He looked at me. Over the last 4 years. I shook my head. I was here almost every weekend during the last month. There wasn't a single consultant. There wasn't a single project. There wasn't even new equipment. Tyler opened his mouth, then closed it again. Grace handed me another folder. These are invoices Tyler submitted. I looked through them. Agricultural planning, livestock expansion analysis, land development forecasting. The paperwork looked professional. Very professional. Almost too professional. I noticed something strange. Every invoice used the same wording, the same formatting, even the same spelling mistake. I looked at Grace. These weren't written over several years. She smiled slightly. What makes you think that? The formatting. She nodded. The forensic accountant noticed the same thing. I flipped to another page. Every invoice had been created using the same software version, the same document template, the same digital font package released less than a year earlier. Yet some invoices were supposedly 4 years old. Someone had created them recently, then backdated them. Tyler rubbed both hands across his face. You don't understand. Then explain. I was going to pay everything back. When? After the land sold. The room fell completely silent. I stared at him. So that was the plan. What? You needed the auction. He didn't answer. Grace quietly finished the sentence for him. Without the auction, the missing money would eventually be discovered. Tyler looked down. For the first time, he didn't deny it. One of Ruth's oldest neighbors stood. His name was Earl Simmons. He'd farmed the property next to ours for almost 50 years. I have a question. Grace nodded. Go ahead. Earl looked at Tyler. Did Ruth know? Tyler answered so quietly I almost missed it. Near the end. How? She started asking for bank statements. What did you tell her? I said the accountant had them. And she hired another accountant. Grace folded her hands. That's when she called me. I couldn't stop thinking about my final conversations with Aunt Ruth. The day she'd said, the future already knows where it's going. She hadn't been talking about dying. She'd already begun preparing for this day. She hadn't been trying to punish Tyler. She'd been trying to protect the farm. Grace reached into the briefcase one final time. This is Schedule C. She handed me a sealed envelope. The document mentioned in Ruth's letter. I carefully opened it. Inside was a single page. Across the top were the words, Trust Continuation Requirements. I began reading aloud. Asterisk, the acting trustee must determine whether Willow Creek Farm remains financially viable as an independent farm. Asterisk. That seemed straightforward. Then I reached the next paragraph. Asterisk, before any sale may occur, the trustee must review the findings of the Independent Agricultural Assessment Commission before my death. Asterisk. I looked up. What's that? Grace smiled. It arrived this morning. She placed another thick report on the table. Prepared by the University of Missouri Agricultural Extension Office. Independent. Professional. Nearly 80 pages. Grace opened directly to the conclusion. The room became silent as she read. Asterisk, based on soil quality, cattle production, lease opportunities and conservation incentives, Willow Creek Farm is projected to remain profitable for at least the next 15 years if properly managed. Asterisk. I felt tears forming. So the farm isn't failing? No. Grace looked around the room. It never was. Every neighbor seemed relieved. Except Tyler. Just then the doors opened again. A sheriff's deputy walked inside. He wasn't in a hurry. He simply walked over to Grace. She quietly handed him a folder. He nodded. Then he approached Tyler. Mr. Harper? Yes. I'd like to speak with you outside. Tyler stood slowly. Am I under arrest? Not today. He looked relieved. The deputy continued. But the county prosecutor has requested that you preserve all financial records connected to Willow Creek Farm. Tyler closed his eyes. He knew exactly what that meant. The investigation wasn't beginning. It had already begun. As the deputy escorted him toward the door, Tyler stopped beside me. I'm sorry. I looked at him. For what? He struggled to answer. Finally he whispered. I stopped seeing it as Aunt Ruth's farm. His voice cracked. And started seeing it as my way out. Then he walked outside. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. Grace quietly reached into the inside pocket of her briefcase. I almost forgot. She placed a small cloth bag in front of me. What is it? Ruth told me to give this to you only after Tyler left. I opened it. Inside was an old brass key. The same style as the keys Aunt Ruth carried her entire life. Attached was a handwritten tag. North Barn. Grain Room. Floorboard 7. I looked up at Grace. What is under the floor? She smiled. I honestly don't know. But Ruth said. She paused. That's where you'll finally understand why she never lost faith in Tyler. Here's the concluding part of the story. I drove back to Willow Creek Farm before sunset. The community hall was still full of relatives asking questions, but I couldn't stop thinking about the brass key in my pocket. North Barn. Grain Room. Floorboard 7. Asterisk asterisk. Grace insisted on coming with me. So did Ruth ever tell you what was under there? I asked as we walked across the gravel driveway. Only that I'd understand after you opened it. The North Barn hadn't changed much since I was a teenager. The red paint had faded. The old sliding door still groaned. The smell of hay and cedar instantly brought back memories of summers spent helping Aunt Ruth feed calves before sunrise. We unlocked the grain room. The wooden floor was worn smooth after decades of use. Grace counted quietly. 1, 2, 3. When she reached the 7th floorboard, she knelt and inserted the brass key into a tiny brass latch I never knew existed. The board lifted. Beneath it sat a weathered metal cash box. My hands trembled as I carried it into the light. Inside were 3 things. A thick envelope, several photo albums, and a small digital recorder. I looked at Grace. Which one first? She smiled gently. Your aunt usually saved the important words for last. I opened the envelope. Inside was another letter. Emmy. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then the auction never happened the way Tyler planned. That means you listened instead of rushing. Thank you. Asterisk. I swallowed hard. Asterisk, I know everyone thinks Tyler only wanted money. That isn't completely true. Asterisk. I frowned. Grace quietly said, keep reading. *5 years ago Tyler came to me ashamed. His commercial real estate business was collapsing. He'd guaranteed loans for a partner who disappeared. He thought bankruptcy would destroy him. I looked up. He never told anyone. Grace shook her head. No. The letter continued. I loaned Tyler money from the farm with one condition. Every dollar had to be documented and repaid. My heart sank. So there really were transfers. Grace nodded. Apparently. Then I reached the next page. For almost 2 years Tyler honored our agreement. Then the payments stopped. I slowly looked toward the farmhouse. So something changed. The final paragraph answered it. When Tyler realized he couldn't repay the loan, he stopped asking for help and started hiding the truth. Shame is a dangerous thing. Left alone long enough, it turns honest people into frightened ones. I folded the letter. For the first time since the funeral, I understood something important. Tyler hadn't begun with greed. He'd begun with fear. But somewhere along the way, fear had become deception. I picked up the digital recorder. There was only one recording. I pressed play. Aunt Ruth's familiar voice filled the room. Hello, Emmy. I couldn't stop the tears. If you're listening to this, then I'm gone. She laughed softly. I always hated dramatic speeches, so I'll keep this short. Grace quietly stepped outside to give me privacy. I've had a good life, Aunt Ruth continued. I've made mistakes. Tyler has too. Her voice became more serious. If he tells the truth, help him rebuild his life. If he keeps lying, let the law do its job. There was a long pause. Then she said something I never expected. The farm doesn't need revenge. It needs someone who loves it more than they love owning it. I closed my eyes. That was exactly who she had always been. The photo albums were filled with things I'd never seen. Pictures of my grandparents building fences by hand. My father as a little boy bottle feeding calves. Aunt Ruth teaching Tyler to drive the old tractor when he was 10. Then I found something tucked into the final album. A handwritten repayment ledger. Every loan. Every payment. Every missed installment. Nothing had been hidden. Nothing exaggerated. Everything was documented. Grace came back inside. This will help. It proves the money started as a legitimate loan. And it proves exactly when things changed. I nodded. It also proves Aunt Ruth never stopped hoping Tyler would do the right thing. Over the next several months, the forensic accounting continued. The investigators confirmed that part of the missing money had originally been authorized as a private loan. But they also found that Tyler later created false consulting invoices to disguise unpaid balances and additional withdrawals. The county prosecutor eventually offered him a plea agreement. Tyler accepted responsibility instead of forcing a trial. He agreed to repay the estate over time by selling several investment properties he still owned. No neighbors lost money. No employees lost their jobs. The farm never entered foreclosure. Most importantly, Willow Creek Farm stayed exactly where Aunt Ruth wanted it. Working. Alive. The trust officially named me permanent trustee after the agricultural review was completed. At first, I worried I couldn't manage my veterinary practice and the farm. Then something unexpected happened. 3 neighboring ranchers volunteered equipment during harvest. Earl offered to supervise cattle whenever I was on emergency calls. Even teenagers from the local FFA chapter came on weekends to help repair old fencing. One afternoon Earl smiled and said, "Your aunt spent 40 years helping this community. Now it's our turn." Almost a year after the funeral, Tyler called. It was the first conversation we'd had since the investigation ended. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I've already forgiven you." Silence. "You have. Forgiveness isn't the same as pretending nothing happened." He let out a long breath. "I'm seeing a financial counselor." "That's good. And a therapist." "I'm glad. I kept thinking I could fix everything alone." "I know. I almost destroyed the one place that ever really felt like home." Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally I asked, "Would you like to visit the farm sometime?" He sounded surprised. "You'd let me. Under one condition." "What's that?" "No talking about land values." He laughed for the first time in over a year. "Deal." That fall we stood together watching a new group of calves wander through the same pasture where we'd played as children. Neither of us talked about the investigation, or the court filings, or the money. We talked about Aunt Ruth, the way she could predict rain before the weather forecast, the peach cobbler she somehow made better every year, the old border collie that used to steal everyone's gloves. Those were the memories worth keeping. People still ask me why the auction never happened. I usually smile and tell them the truth. Because one auctioneer refused to ignore a sealed envelope. Because one attorney honored a promise. Because one woman planned carefully enough to protect both her farm and the people she loved, even the one who disappointed her most. I inherited more than 200 acres that day. I inherited the responsibility to protect a family's history without letting bitterness become part of it. The farm is still there. The cattle still graze. The north barn still creaks every winter. And every time I unlock that grain room, I remember something Aunt Ruth taught me long before she ever wrote a trust. Land can be inherited. Buildings can be repaired. Money can be earned again. But character is built one honest decision at a time. That's the only inheritance that truly lasts.